So I'm Senior Manager of Innovation, which is a title that doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot in and of itself. But I've been with Direct Supply for almost 15 years, and my focus is really on finding solutions to some of these tougher problems that exist in the industry. So I think there's a lot of kind of tried and true solutions that are out there for a lot of problems. We try to focus, I always say, on the things that like keep our customers up at night. Like what are those things that are out there in the ether that man, if we could just solve this thing, it would make life so much better for people. And that's where I tend to focus a lot of my attention. And so do a lot of voice of customer work. We bring a lot of customers through this space and try to hear it directly from them. We try not to have the telephone game in place. I want to hear it directly from their mouth. And then ultimately we go down the pathway of finding solutions, whether that's things we're going to build internally, partnering with third parties from anywhere around the world, and go through the full kind of testing exercise and everything else to kind of prove that they do what they say they should do, with the whole goal of eventually getting out into the market and starting to scale it so we can truly kind of move the needle on some of these problem sets.
Terrific. So let's talk a little bit about robots.
Yeah.
I first started seeing robots, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago when I was first started blogging and writing and talking about the industry, and almost immediately, man, this is going to be a game changer.
Yep.
We're now 12 years down the road since I saw my first robots, and once in a while I see a robot in a dining room, but they've gotten very little traction. Why is that?
Yeah, I think the honest answer is, I think when they kind of first started coming out, I think they were a novelty. I think it was this is interesting. Maybe it is kind of interesting from a marketing perspective, but they're not really providing value at that point. And I think where things have shifted have been, I mean, the cost of labor, the cost of delivering, services within the community continues to rise. And so all of a sudden, some of these things that were a novelty years ago, there's a legitimate financial decision behind, if we can automate this and focus our human resources on resident care and resident interaction and let this other stuff get kind of automated away, it really moves the needle for customers in terms of their ability to kind of bring down their cost, or at least maintain their cost of delivering those services to residents. So I think we're seeing a little more adoption. I think you see it, obviously if you go overseas, it was kind of built into those kind of social structure. So if you look at Japan, robots are everywhere. And they've kind of adopted it there. And in the US, just, we're just behind the times from that standpoint. But I think we're starting to see that tide turn a little bit for kind of focused applications.
Well, it was really interesting on this particular trip. I left home and I spent a couple days in Minneapolis, and my flight was super delayed, so I didn't end up at the Minneapolis airport until 11:30 or not. And there were robots everywhere. I mean, the floor cleaning robots, I must have seen probably more like a dozen of them. And so where are you seeing the best applications for robots in senior living right now?
Yeah, so when I talk about this with customers, I always talk about the D's, and it's kind of the way I've kind of set my mind around it. Dull, dirty, dangerous, duplicative, those are the ways that we talk about it. The focus is there's all of this work that has to happen kind of on the peripheral of care, right? And so what are those things where you don't necessarily get value from putting your human resources towards it, or it's more expensive, or more often we're talking to people and they're just tough jobs to hire for. Finding somebody to come in and clean your floors and push a vacuum up and down a hallway for 6 hours a day, it's not an easy job to hire for in the first place, and it's probably not super beneficial for the person doing that work. And so I think that's where we're seeing kind of the push happen. I think there's interest along all sorts of additional applications, but I think where the development is right now is in some of those maybe more kind of back of house areas. But there are really cool applications. You talked about the airport. So I got the opportunity to go to Japan and meet with some kind of robotics companies there, and also talk to some senior care operators within the country. Well, one of the cool things that they had there was like autonomous wheelchairs in the airport. So for people that were moving from, check-in down to their gate, instead of having a person push them down and everything that's associated with that, it's like indoor Uber. They hop into this autonomous wheelchair. They say, I'm going to gate D4, and they're off.
So it's like a Waymo for wheelchair.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I think we're seeing more and more of that of like, great, like if we can give people more autonomy and let them kind of go at their own pace, like cool, like let's bring some of those pieces in.
Oh man, I hadn't even thought about that, but I've been in so many communities where there are 10 or 15, maybe 20% of the residents who need help getting to and from the dining room. And I can imagine being able to do that and then freeing up people to do people stuff.
Yeah, it's one of the ones like I love this idea of indoor Uber within a community, because we've talked to residents within communities, and some of these communities are massive. And you have residents who aren't coming down for dinner or aren't coming down for a meal because maybe they're tired or they don't feel well. And it's a haul to get from one side of the building all the way down to the dining room. And so they say, well, I'm just going to stay in my room. If they had the ability to say, like, can I grab a ride? And hey, wheelchair's going to be at your front door in 2 minutes, hop in and it'll bring you down to the dining room. Like, it changes the dynamic of that entire community.
So what about the legal implications of that? I mean, I really like the idea, but I can just see the attorney saying, oh man, you got to have a caregiver to help them get into that chair or to get out of that chair.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the liability, I think with automation and robotics is always a question that comes up. And I think the honest answer is like all these solutions, at least the ones that I'm focusing on, are built with a senior population in mind. So when we look at the wheelchairs, when we look at floor care robotics and other things, we always get the questions like, well, what happens when it comes across another resident in the hallway? Like, is it going to barrel through them, or is it going to be a trip hazard or something else? And it's funny because like the technology is such where like, if there's a resident coming down the hallway, like we'll just stop or we'll move out of the way, we'll wait for them to pass, and they'll kind of go back amongst our business. And so when we first install within a building, it's always super interesting because it's the first, 2 days, it's all the side eyes. We'll get side eyes from residents, from staff members of like, not quite sure about how this is going to work or how they need to interact with it. And we'll spend a lot of time kind of educating them and walking them through of like, here, you don't have to worry about it. If you're walking down the hall and it's coming toward you, you just keep going. Like, it'll get out of your way. And usually by the end of that first week, like they're cool. Like they're happy about it. They're excited to have investment within the community, and they're not worried about it. So we've got, just on the floor care side, I think with one of our groups, we've done like 7,000 hours of autonomous usage just in the past few months, and like zero resident, impact or injuries or anything else. If anything, it's resident naming conventions, wanting to name them, wanting to understand how they work. And then the residents honestly like getting on the caregiving staff when it's not being used. I'm like, why wasn't it used today? Where is it? What's going on? And so it's always cool to see how the residents get engaged with this technology adoption.
So are there any operators out there, not necessarily naming who they are there any operators who've really gone all in on this robot? And what does that look like?
I would say all in is maybe a term I wouldn't use, but I think there's absolutely, I think when we look at the previous years, you probably had the innovators within the industry that were bringing robotics into the building. And I think from the kind of core of the industry, they were looking at those innovators as they tried all sorts of crazy stuff. We're not sure if it's going to last or not, so it's not quite time for us. I think really within the last maybe few years, maybe 2 years even, we've seen it shift from the innovators to, I'll say, like the early adopters. And now these are, legitimate names in the industry that people look to for foresight into like what's going to happen. And they're starting to bring them in and use them for food service and for dining and for lawn maintenance and other things. And they're starting to kind of test these out. and starting to prove the real value. And now I think everybody else is all of a sudden like, oh, like this is legitimate. Like we actually need to be thinking about this. And I think the other side of it is, our customers and operators out there are starting to feel the pain of staffing. The cost of staffing is going up. The availability of staffing is becoming more constricted. And so, they're seeing this as a legitimate pathway to getting the work done that they need to get done within the community in a non-traditional way.
Cool. So you and I, we're going to become senior living owners, operators, developers. Okay. And we have made the decision that we are going to go and do automation and robots in every single place that we can in our community. Then what are we going to do?
The honest answer is, I'm going to look at it from where are we spending the most time, where are we spending the most money, and what is the differentiator for us compared to everybody else, right? So I always talk about robotics and automation as enabling the workforce, not as replacing them. And so, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of what are the things that bring residents into my community in the first place? It's the interaction that they have with staff. It's the services that we offer. It's those types of things. How do I optimize those? Now, what's everything else that we have to do to operate this building? And where can we apply technology to take as much of that burden off of us as possible? That's the way I'm going to look at it. Mm-hmm. And one by one, start to kind of check things off.
Okay, so give me some examples of where we'd actually use it. Lawn care,
I think food service, indoor delivery, we're seeing more and more of so like room service delivery type things. Floor care, I think a lot of the cleaning tasks we're seeing where we can just kind of trigger some of these systems to run overnight. Mm-hmm. We wake up in the morning and we're done. Everything's clean. I think we're looking for some of those additional applications. So, I don't see robotics as a huge player in direct caregiving, but we're looking at how robotics and technology can play a role in caregiver support. So, looking at clinical staff and the work that they're doing, how do we make their job a little easier? Even if it's, I'm going to go bring supplies to the caregiver when they need it, where they need it, versus them having to run back to a closet, grab all the stuff they need, come back. Like all of that running back and forth isn't value added for anybody. And so if I can keep my staff on task and automate some of the, just delivery of things that they need, I'll focus on that.
So as we talked about, what we were going to talk about today was robots and automation. How do you see automation outside of robots?
Sure. Honestly, I don't look at it terribly differently.
Okay.
So I when I talk about robotics with folks, I always talk about robotics as kind of AI with a physical form. Yeah. But fundamentally, those same like D's that I talked about are there. So what is that duplicative work that we do a ton of? What is that dull work that we have people in a back office knocking out at all hours because it's just work that has to get done? So I look at just normal automation in a very similar path of what are we spending a significant amount of time on? What isn't necessarily value added or differentiated for us? And how can we apply technology to take that off the plate? And whether that's the usage of AI tools, just straightforward software automation, or some combination of things. I'm always looking at it of where is value being created, and where do we differentiate? I think that's probably the thing that I think lands with the most people is that residents aren't coming into your building because you have all this technology in place, right? They're coming in because they want community, they want service, they want support, they want to, age in a specific way. If someone's pushing a vacuum cleaner down the hallway or a robot's doing it, it fundamentally doesn't change the experience for that person. But having access, so maybe it's the housekeeper coming into their apartment and doing cleaning and having a deeper conversation with them than they normally would, because they're kind of rushing to get to the room. If we can give them even 5 more minutes to interact with that resident, have a little deeper conversation there, it completely changes that resident's experience within that community. And I think that's what we're ultimately trying to drive.
Cool. So, how do families react?
Yeah. The funny thing is, I think families react probably worse than the residents. I think a lot of families look at it as like, well, I'm not sure. And a lot of times it's the residents that actually talk the family members into it. And so, there's always I think the concern of kind of safety with robotics and things like that. But then all of a sudden the residents turn to like, oh no, this is Robbie, my little friend that cleans the hallways every night. And we see him move all the time and it's a great addition. I think like family sees that piece, and sees how their loved ones respond. And I think it completely like brings down the barriers, for that. I think, staff members of the other side of, a lot of times when you talk about bringing automation in and you're the worker in that case, it's the immediate fear of robots are coming after my job, or technology is coming after my job. And so a lot of where we focus our attention is on like that change management of like, we want to bring everybody along in this journey, and we want to bring that housekeeper in and say, listen, what aspects of your job aren't enjoyable? And can we take those pieces off through automation to give you more time to focus on the things that you actually get value out of?
Terrific. So let's talk a little bit about direct supplies. You don't actually make robots, right? So how do I'm thinking about robots. How do I interact with direct supply? How do you bring value to operators?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I should, as much as we've talked about it internally, we do not want to start a robotics manufacturing business. That is not our sweet spot. So, the role that we play and the way that I've talked about this with our customers is that anybody has the ability to go out and like buy a robot off the internet somewhere, and it'll get drop shipped to your door. You're kind of on your own then to figure out how to bring it into your operations and how to get the most out of it. The other piece is it'll be great when it's working, and then when it doesn't, now the real trouble begins. And so the role that we play is, upfront, we're really doing a deep dive to understand the customer problem. We're diving in and making sure, like, all right, what is the application that we're going on? Then we're going and looking at what the application of technology is. As much as I'm an engineer by background, and I think that, technology could be the solution to everything. Oftentimes, like, part of the first conversation is like, we just need to talk about process improvement. Like, we need to talk about, there's a very inefficient way that you're doing things today. How could we just be more efficient even without technology? But once we get to the point of having solutions that we think meet the need, our goal is that we are holding the hand of our customer throughout this whole journey. We're understanding their need. We're understanding their baseline of information. And then we're going through, we're on site doing the installation. We're doing the training with them. We're focusing on the ongoing kind of customer success piece. Because the other thing we have to deal with is, like, you have tremendous turnover within these buildings. And you might have a great team today, but 6 months from now, like 25% of that team may be all that's remaining. And so we want to focus on the kind of ongoing customer success. How do we make sure that you're continuing to get the most out of these platforms? And then how do we quantify the value being created? So how do we work with you to show, like, here's what we've actually saved. Here's the time that we've given back, so that as you look to bring in other robotics, or if you look to automate other pieces, it's easier to make that play kind of up within the organization to say, hey, here, we put this in place. Here's the value that it delivered for us. And we can easily take that next step to whatever the next problem set is that we want to take on.
So can we make a direct comparison? Do you have any data that says I can essentially replace one FTE with one robot, or I can replace half an FTE with a robot? Can you help me with that?
Yeah, I mean, we do. And we have great data from our customer sites on the impact that we've seen. I think the honest answer is there are some folks that are saying, listen, we have to bring down the cost of operations, and we want to attempt to kind of, take people out. And we have data on that side. And then we have data on the other side, which is we just want to repurpose our folks for other things. And so we're not actually focusing on a reduction. But I mean, in terms of like giving hours back, I mean, in a single building, we've seen the ability to give anywhere from, maybe 15 to 20 hours on the low end to 50 to 60 hours on the high end, like back to the community to use however they want, whether that's in reduction or reallocation or anything else. If they're willing to kind of go through the change management. And that's the toughest part, is that the people have to buy in, and they have to want to make the change. They have to see the value there. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, is that they kind of rush into solution, and they don't bring their folks along on the journey. And so then it becomes this kind of pushback on new technology coming in.
So you touched on this, and you got me curious. What if my robot breaks, and how often do they break?
Yeah, depends on the solution. And it depends on how heavily you're using it, in all honesty. So maybe I'll talk to kind of the floor care side of the world. I mean, we have customers that they can cover their entire building in 3 hours. They can vacuum every surface. We have some that are, 250,000, 300,000 square foot buildings where they've got multiple robots running 6 hours a day. And so, the goal for us is all about uptime and how often they break. The honest answer is they don't break that often, but a little bit of it has to do with kind of preventative maintenance, like anything else. If you just run it into the ground and you're never taking care of it, like it's probably going to break pretty quick. We always talk about the idea of a spa day, which is like take it out of service, like give it a once over and then kind of bring it back in. But when they have an issue, the way that we've kind of formed our programs is around this swap model, which is instead of like sending somebody out to the site or sending a truck and hoping they have the parts that they need or anything like that, if you have an issue and we can't remotely diagnose and fix it, we're just going to replace the unit. We're going to swap it out with a new one.
Right.
And the plus side of that in the whole scheme of things is if you are going through the change management of saying, we're not going to do this work anymore, then if that piece of technology that you're dependent on goes down, and now it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks it gets repaired, all of a sudden you have to go back into the old habits. And so everything we're focused on is like, if it goes down, our goal is within 48 hours, we have a replacement unit there, you're back up and running. Cool. The good news is everything's cloud enabled. So we kind of take the brains of the old one, drop it into the new one, and it's off and running. And so that's a big piece that I think is really focused on just the ongoing kind of success piece for our customers.
So if you sort of had one 30-second soundbite where operators who have not really embraced robots, what would it be?
I think my kind of plea would ultimately be like, you've got to give it a try. I think there are a lot of people that are hesitant for a bunch of different reasons. But the writing is on the wall that the staffing challenges that this industry sees today, we may be at the best it's ever going to be in the foreseeable future. And so, it's only going to get tougher to get this work done in the future. And we have to start thinking differently today. And so even if it's like one building or two buildings and one specific workflow that we're going to try to automate, like let's start doing that today. Let's start testing it out. So when you're ready to scale, you've got the experience behind it. And you're not having to rush into it. And two, like we're able to build a program of here's how it works with these initial buildings. Now, how do we scale that across the rest of your portfolio and scale the value that we can represent?
Perfect. Justin, great conversation. Appreciate the time. Appreciate you, Pat.
Yeah, thank you for having me.